I don't know what that entails. Does that red light mean that we're on?
Yes, it does.
Okay. All right. I'm going to call the Wilton Board of Education Thursday, August 19th, regular meeting to order. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Glenn. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Ruth. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Agenda's approved. Comments from the public? We can take them tonight in two ways. One is if there are members here from the public who wish to speak. Now's a chance. Or on Zoom via email to Lucille DeNovio. Do we have any speakers or emails?
I do not have any emails.
All right. And I don't see anyone here. There will be an opportunity at the end of the meeting. Consent agenda. Is there a move to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thanks, Glenn. Second?
Second.
All right, Ruth, all in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Abstaining because I wasn't on the board. For this
Okay.
meeting, so.
Well, that brings me to the board chair's report, where I want to say welcome back, everyone. Certainly board members, and especially to Laura Schwemm. So thank you for joining us for these next few weeks. Really appreciate it. Also like to thank our AV tech crew that's here tonight filming for us. There are three people, one of whom it's his birthday tonight, so we appreciate his extra time and effort on his birthday. So thank you. These are students who are skilled and dedicated, so I want to thank them in advance. Also, I think we're all sort of beginning to feel the buildup for the beginning of the school year, that sort of annual positive vibe that emerges at this time of year. And so I think about all the kids, pre-K to seniors, and each one is anticipating the year with high expectations. So our mission, as we all know, as a district, is to provide the educational environment so that all our kids can realize their hopes and dreams for this year. So in order to have a smooth opening to school, it takes a lot of summer work. And I wanted to take a minute before the students and the teachers come back and say a special thank you to our our district summer staff, which includes the Dr. Smith, the district leadership, all the principals, the office staff, custodians, and anyone else that I haven't mentioned. But the behind-the-scenes summer work is immense, and so we thank you as we anticipate a smooth school opening. Tonight we have a lot on our agenda, so let's get started, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Smith.
Great, thank you. And I will echo you in several ways. First, happy birthday, it's happy 17th birthday to Joe Eustace, who spends as much time here as we do and has for a couple years now as the AV team. So we want to wish him well and thank him for being downstairs. And to all of you and everybody at home who's watching and the couple folks who joined us tonight, welcome back to a new school year. We're excited to launch this school year. Staff across the district have been finalizing their preparations, and we're really excited and looking forward to welcoming students in person on Monday, August 30th. I also want to extend a very warm welcome to all of our new families, of which we have a considerable number who've moved into town over the course of the last year. And then finally give a very special acknowledgement to our senior class, the class of 2022, if you can get your head around that number. Right. So, as you can see, logistically, we're picking up where we left off in June. So our meeting is hybrid with administrators joining us remotely, and then other members of the public have the opportunity to be here in person or to tune in through Zoom online. And I expect we'll continue this format, probably through the entire school year. So, as Debbie noted, I too know there's mounting nervousness as we approach the start of school about the increase in COVID-19 cases. I want to assure all of you that we are well planned and well prepared to ensure that this will be a great school year. We'll continue to communicate routinely, and we're going to ask all of our community members to be flexible as we continue to adapt and respond to changing conditions. Switching gears here, as always, there's much to celebrate. And so As part of that, I want to thank in advance and celebrate all of you and our staff and our families for the tremendous ongoing partnership. I also want to celebrate and recognize our PTA presidents who, like so many of us, have been working routinely across the summer, gathering information, sharing information, making themselves ready to start this school year. And we know we work best when we work well together. I think the previous school year really illustrated that beyond the shadow of a doubt. In celebrating in other news, we learned this summer that you all, the Wilton Board of Education, was again the recipient of the Connecticut Boards of Education Level 2 Leadership Award. And this award is one that recognizes high-performing boards of education, so I want to congratulate you on that recognition again. The board also received several Bonnie E. Carney Communication Award honorable mentions. There was a recognition in the social media category, one in the district budget category, and then 2 from CABE in the special projects category. And those are, we receive awards pretty regularly, and I think it speaks to the high quality of the information that we present, so congratulations on that. I'm going to stop there because you're going to be hearing a lot from me, and so the rest of my comments are going to be organized through the rest of the agenda, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Committee reports, I honestly don't know of a committee that met, but somebody could remind me differently? No?
Nope.
All right. So, Dr. Smith, back to you.
Back on it, okay. So-
Review and discuss COVID protocols.
So
thank
tonight, we're going to organize my update really in 2 pieces. One, I want to start with COVID protocols and really speak specifically to health and safety strategies. And then the second piece on the 2021 opening update, I'll just contain those comments around our reopening plans and updates. And we'll start that section with a vaccination status update. And we've got lots of good information to share. All of the information that I'm sharing tonight, we've sent out recently. You received this. Our parents and staff received this. Lucille has it on the screen. And so it contains all of our opening strategies. So I'll be referencing this throughout these comments.
Can you remind us when you'd like us to if we have questions?
Sure.
When you want
So why
to
don't
take
we,
those?
if you don't mind, I'll walk through COVID protocols.
Okay.
And then I'll stop and we can just revisit any of the comments, any of the information that was shared. And then we can do the same with the second piece if that makes sense. First, we've retained a number of high leverage health and safety strategies, and we've relaxed others in an effort to maximize high-impact instruction. And these, we've talked about these in the past, so these should make sense. The first item is masks. So as I think everybody knows, currently we're operating under binding guidance issued by the Commissioner of Public Health and the Commissioner of Education as authorized by the Governor through Executive Order 13A, which requires all individuals, regardless of vaccination status, to wear masks while inside a school building. That guidance is in force through September 30th, and at some point we'll get updated guidance, but I don't really have a sense of when that's going to be. And so as soon as we know something else about masks, we'll certainly share it. But that's really the punchline, and I think the answer to the mask question. With respect to social distancing, we'll continue to practice social distancing to the extent possible. Where we can achieve 3 feet or greater, we will. Most of our classrooms, because of the population density, we really can't achieve 3 feet consistently. So where we can, we will, but we won't be able to have 3 feet always and everywhere. So all the more reason why it'll be important that we have masks. Certainly while students are eating their lunches, we will have students at least 3 feet apart. In cases where we can have more social distance, we will. And so our lunch protocols will be very similar to last year. We'll also, as we did a year ago, continue to access the outdoors and take advantage of as much outdoor time as possible, certainly as the weather permits. In our music classes, to start the year, will again retain the social distance parameters that we utilized last year. There is some updated research that suggests that social distancing in choral classes can be reduced to 3 feet if students are wearing masks, but the Department of Public Health hasn't yet offered any updated guidance. So the guidance that they published most recently suggests at least 6 feet in those classes, and so that's the guidance we're going to follow until it changes, unless it changes. Again, hand washing and hand sanitizing, very important practices with all of our staff and students. We'll continue to have hand sanitizing stations at the entrance of each school and in every classroom. It will be, as it has been, the expectation that students and staff will sanitize their hands as they enter the buildings and classrooms, and then we'll maintain the signage reinforcing those messages. With respect to ventilation, we continue to implement the Department of Public Health's ventilation guidance from a year ago. As you know, that guidance stipulated that we set our system so they maximize fresh airflow through the buildings. We increased the quality of the filter we use, so it's a little thicker than the standard filters. That presents a challenge when you're trying to move air through the building, but our systems retain those settings. We engaged with a commissioning agent again this year, and that person has been working with Mark Esposito, our full-time HVAC specialist, going through each of our buildings. I expect to have that report fairly shortly. But we should feel pretty confident in the job that Mark has done and will do. He's top-notch, and our systems, are in very, very good shape. With respect to cleaning and disinfecting, the DPH has updated their guidance there and are suggesting that the kind of rigorous cleaning that was in place last year doesn't need to be in place this year. They're pretty confident that fomite transmission is very low risk, and so the recommendation is that we revert to the traditional routine daily cleaning, and then we maintain the cleaning and disinfecting of particular areas, bathrooms, nurses' stations, so we'll do that. We were one of the few districts a year ago that introduced voluntary surveillance testing, and so as part of the welcome back to school guidance that the State Department of Ed is offering, they are proposing surveillance testing as another high leverage strategy. So we'll continue to offer voluntary surveillance testing. We sent out the link to that in one of our memos to families, and we'll continue to invite those who are unvaccinated, particularly families at Cider Mill and Miller Driscoll, to participate. And so that will continue weekly. As you've seen and you'll hear about later on, our vaccination rates for eligible individuals are very high, and so I expect them to continue to increase, but we'll keep surveillance testing as an added measure. With contact tracing and quarantining, this is a practice we got very good at a year ago, and so we'll continue first to maintain isolation spaces in our schools, then we'll use as necessary. We'll follow the Connecticut Department of Public Health and State Department of Education interim recommendations for contact tracing and quarantining. They have changed slightly, and so per a CDC recommendation, there is a couple of carve-outs. So one of them pertains to students only in classrooms, and so if students are within 3 feet, then they'll need to quarantine. But if they're 3 feet or greater and they're wearing a mask and they aren't showing symptoms, then they will not need to quarantine. And so if you think about the way we operated last year and the numbers of students we had to quarantine because of direct contact, this will be a really important mechanism to reduce significantly the potential number of students who will need to quarantine. Vaccinated individuals, as long as they're asymptomatic, do not need to quarantine, so that's also a change from the guidance that was published in the middle part of last year. And then for unvaccinated folks, the guidance remains the same. And so we have our quarantine and contact tracing procedures set up and ready to go. Cross your fingers, we won't need them, but we are ready to go. I'll stop there.
Questions?
Yeah.
What is the status of lockers? Can
We'll
they
be
use-
using
Are we going to use,
Yes.
lockers will be used this
Yes,
year?
It will.
Great, because it's not mentioned anywhere. So that's good news. Okay, that's great.
Are we using gym lockers as well? Are
Yep.
kids changing?
Yep,
Everybody's
kids will be
doing everything?
changing, gym lockers, and I
Okay.
think, you know what, when we look at the highest leverage strategies, so certainly middle school, high school, you know, vaccinated individuals, and we have quite a number of them in those schools, highest leverage strategy followed by masks. You know, talking with Dr. Mack, and she reviewed our protocols, we think, you know, there are lots of practices we had in place before the pandemic that we can return to. And I think, like everything else, you know, we'll, of course, be monitoring daily, and we can adjust as necessary. But, you know, those two things for sure we
Yeah.
have in place to start the year.
I mean, we came through last year really unbelievably well, all things considered, I think. And to continue what we did last year makes all the sense in the world to keep it up. I'm pleasantly surprised, or well, I shouldn't be surprised perhaps, by the percentage of our staff that's vaccinated. I think it's phenomenal. But do we know, obviously, perhaps everyone hasn't responded or didn't participate in the survey, but let's say if there's 85% at Miller Driscoll, of that 15% that aren't vaccinated, do we know what portion, if any of those, have had COVID and recovered, and now have, you know, we don't have?
We didn't ask
Okay.
that question.
Yeah, because I think they may not be vaccinated for a very good reason. They don't need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would skew, the percentages are incredible. And our students also.
Yes.
The families have been diligent, evidently, about getting their children who are able and qualified, or 12 and older, vaccinated. And that's fantastic. It speaks so highly of the community.
Yeah,
Care.
we have, I think we are, Wilton, among that age population, I think we might be the 4th highest vaccinated population in the state.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Eligible
It's
children.
great. I'm thrilled to see that. And it's not going to be an easy year, certainly, but we're doing all the right things, I think. So, the other question about the mask mandate for Lamont, his ability to issue executive orders expires September 30th,
Right.
unless it's renewed again by the legislature. So I don't know what's going to happen there, or who then is going to be the person making the decision. I don't think we have any guidance or any.
We don't.
Okay, so we're good through the 30th, and then we just wait and see, right?
That's correct.
Because he cannot, after the 30th, his ability to issue executive orders goes away.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Great. Any other questions? Hi, Mandy. Welcome. So good to see you. Yeah. Other questions on COVID protocols?
Vaccination numbers that came in. Anybody who did not respond, did they count as being not vaccinated, or did we just skip it?
No, it's unvaccinated. So the percentage that we reported is of the total population in the building. So what Maria and her staff have been doing is going back and reaching out to folks and trying to, you know, nail down their status. And so
Okay.
we'll continue that. And there's, I don't know if all of you caught, we're going to actually transition to that. Vaccinations is like the first item under the 2021 opening update. And so Maria's going to walk us through all of those numbers, and she can explain all of that in fair detail. And then if you haven't seen the governor's order, you know, he's now imposing a vaccine mandate for all K-12 staff. And so that's something we have to get the specifics of that order and begin to implement it. So that'll, you know, I expect we'll hear the details in the next day or so.
Kevin, that's just for staff. Have you guys discussed the vaccination for the students, the survey going out?
That's coming up. You got
Okay.
here just in
Got it.
time.
Mask breaks, are we going to go back to doing them?
We are. Yeah, we are. And that'll be, you know, determined by the administrators, you know, in concert with the teachers.
And they're not required outside, correct?
Masks are not required outside. Correct.
And what about the lunchroom?
What about the lunchroom?
So during lunch, will they be social distanced again, or will?
They will.
lunch- So lunch will not be in the lunchrooms?
So lunch will be in the cafeterias at the high school, at Middlebrook, at Cider Mill. The high school, they'll also, at the two upper schools, they'll have overflow space in the gymnasia. Cider Mill will utilize the science lab upstairs as they did last year. At Miller Driscoll, the students will eat lunch in their classrooms and in the cafeteria. And so the administrators there have set up a rotating plan to move kids over a period of weeks in and out of the cafeteria. but students will be spaced at least 3 feet apart. They'll obviously have their masks off when they're eating, and then they'll go out and enjoy recess.
And if you discussed this already, I can go back and listen, but for the sneeze guards are gone,
Sneeze guards are gone.
and tables are 3 feet apart?
And so in the cafeteria, tables are 3 feet apart. In the classrooms, we're going to try to achieve 3 feet where we can, but we also know we'll have teachers who are episodically pulling kids for small
Right.
groups. And so, you'll see kids clustered at periods of time for instruction.
Got it.
My only other question is about surveillance testing. Are we paying for that, or is the state paying for it this time?
So we have a supply of tests remaining that we'll use, and then the state has offered a surveillance testing program, but it's for targeted groups. And so we'll pursue that with the state, and as much as we can access their programs, we will.
Can you talk a little bit more about ventilation, given the fact that it's nice weather? To what extent can we open windows, go outside, take more masks, breaks? If we're outside, we don't have to wear masks. Are we going to do sort of what we tried to do last year and get out as much as we can?
Absolutely. So, at the high school, the campus will remain open, and so students will have the opportunity to eat outside. The seniors will have the privilege to leave campus during lunch. In all of our other schools, the issue for our buildings really is around humidity. And so, when it's not humid and we're not running the air conditioning as much, windows can be open, we can, maximize fresh airflow. It gets challenging to maintain the interior conditions in high humidity. And so that's when, we want to, Mark just, he's has it down to a science.
Okay.
But, he's always, monitoring our machines, especially on those hot days, because we're trying to keep the climate controlled as well while maximizing as much fresh airflow as possible.
Yeah, and I understand the humidity is going to complicate things. PE classes, physical education classes?
Yep, they will run as they have in the past.
Okay.
The PE teachers, when they're doing engaging in activities that are high respiration, they'll have the kids spread out, and certainly, for the start of the year, weather permitting, they'll have students outside as much as they're able to.
Okay, and then just one more question for me anyway, is or at least for now, the quarantine thing. If we're not, can you explain the 3 feet and the quarantine and the vaccine?
So.
And the mask and the unmasked and the students and the staff?
So, right.
So I guess I'm, sort of zeroed in maybe more at the elementary level
Yeah.
in terms of
Yeah.
who might need to be quarantined
Yeah.
since they're not going to be vaccinated, they can't have been vaccinated.
Right. So if students in the elementary school, so we'll just use that as an example, right? If they are at least 3 feet from a positive individual and they're wearing a mask and they're asymptomatic, they will not need to quarantine. If they're within 3 feet for more than 15 minutes over a 24-hour period, or for some reason they're not wearing a mask, or they're symptomatic, then the quarantine rules apply.
And the quarantine is 10 days?
10 days, or there's a 7-day quarantine provision also, based on being asymptomatic and having
2 negative tests.
Two negative
at day 5
tests.
and 7.
Right.
Okay.
I think it would be helpful, I think for all the parents out there, if we could just kind of say what a day might look like as compared to last year, just in terms of even like the younger kids, so we're talking about returning to small group instruction, being able to fully move around the classroom. We're going to the art room, we're going to the music room. There will be, I presume, multiple classes out on the playground at the same time. I think that would, how buses will be operating at the end of the day.
Sure.
I think that might be a little bit helpful.
I agree, like an FAQ document would be great to send out, because there's so many questions.
Right.
Like just from each principal, or something along those lines, just lockers will be used, we'll be changing a gym, just kind of
Yeah, I agree.
just a picture of,
So you think what would be more helpful is by building? Because much of that information was published in the documents I sent out, but
Yeah,
you
I
think
think
it
by
would be?
building would be
By
helpful.
building would be
Yeah.
more helpful? Okay, we
yeah,
can
I
certainly
think
do
that, you know, even if it's just kind of like a handout, maybe at Meet the Teacher Day, or an email that just goes out, just kind of to give like a sense of,
Right,
Yeah.
when you're talking to your child and they're like, well, what will it be like this year? Are we going to the library? Are we going to this? Just so they
sure.
can have, parents can answer those questions easily.
So I'm just trying to imagine how the easiest format for that. So an example of a daily schedule, a day in the life of a
Yeah, like
child,
a day, yeah, exactly,
illustrated
like a day in the
at a grade
life,
level?
and,
Okay.
you know, in Village or School, a day in the life of kind of cider mill, like,
Well,
you'll be-
starting with maybe the bus ride.
Yeah, you get off the bus and you go, you know,
Sure,
to your
okay.
class, and if you're changing classes for subjects or front, you know, in cider mill, just also, some of those kids, some of those third graders were not in that school
Yeah, fair
the
enough.
year
Yep.
prior,
Good point.
so
Sure.
their cider mill experience is very different from a kid that had already been there
Yeah.
the year before that, so just.
Yeah, we can do that,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And Kevin, as part of that, the bus question, if
Sure.
you want to take a bus to daycare or to the Y,
Yeah, so we'll be providing transportation to childcare centers, to pre-planned after-school activities.
Library.
What we're not going to do, unless it's a pre-assigned activity, we're not going to be providing ad hoc transportation, play dates. Generally speaking, in the past before COVID, kids could board the bus for downtown. And so we're not going to start the year allowing that. And that's really because we need to have clear bus rosters in case we have to contact trace. And so our thinking right now is, we know there are activities and childcare centers and things like that that kids have to get to. And those we can plan for because they're pre-registered in advance, and so we can, predict which kids are going to be on which buses in the afternoon, and that way we can assign seats. And if we have to contact trace, we can do that effectively. Our thinking is we'll watch how the first several weeks of school unfold. If transmission rates are constant or begin to decline, and we feel comfortable that we can start to loosen things up again, then that would be one of the areas where we would loosen up a little bit more.
so if my child is getting tutored at the library, I would send an email saying every Tuesday my child has to go to the library, or in that case,
I'm going to go back and talk to the principals about that. We weren't talking specifically about, those kind of
One-off.
one-off moments.
Yeah.
What we're talking about are, programs that kids pre-register for.
right. And then going back to the vaccination question, I'm sure Jen has more questions. Sorry, Jen. If a child who has been vaccinated, you mentioned the quarantining for kids who had not been vaccinated.
Right.
For a child who has been vaccinated.
They don't need to quarantine right now, not under
So if
the
they are
current
within
guidance.
3 feet of a positive child.
If you're vaccinated, you don't need to quarantine.
And asymptomatic.
And
Yes, you have to be
yeah.
asymptomatic, that's right.
Got it.
Right.
So Jen, did you have more questions on vaccinations?
I was just going to say, if you're
Laura.
going to send out the FAQ in an email format, try to do it before Meet the Teacher, because that way,
Yeah, they can-
hopefully, ideally, the teacher won't have to be answering the same questions over and over again.
Sure.
And the kids can focus on just meeting the teacher in their classroom.
So any other questions or comments on that part?
It's all good, as good as can be.
Great. All right, so why don't we move into the next piece, and I'm going to have Maria, who should be present with us virtually, just walk us through the vaccination numbers.
Yes, okay. And some of them were in this packet as well.
Yeah, you have this
Yeah.
summary.
Right.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi, Maria.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oh, it looks like I'm not able to.
We're seeing it.
Yeah, we have it here, Maria.
Oh, okay.
So just,
So let me pull it up on my screen. Okay, here we go. So the vaccination survey results that I'm going to share reflect the surveys that we administered to all parents of students who are age 12 and older. Those are the students who are eligible for the vaccine, and all staff members across the district. We administered this vaccine in the first 2 weeks of August, And I want to be really clear that, just to state the obvious, many people aren't checking their email regularly over the summer or are on vacation. So the vaccination rates that I'm reporting out on tonight are really as of, early this week, because we had people continuing to respond. And in fact, even as of today, we've been having people continuing to respond. We are gathering more information. I will give an update in the future on all of the information that we've collected. But so far, the response rate has been very good, and we're very optimistic that the rates are even higher than what I'm going to report out on tonight. I'm going to go ahead and advance slide, or ask Lucille or Kevin to advance the slide. Okay. So just to begin with students, we combined the high school, Genesis, and community steps populations into one group. And the reason for that is the group size for Genesis and community steps is quite small, and we didn't present any information that could be personally identifiable for some of the students in those groups. So we've combined them all into one. All students in those groups are eligible, so it's 1,250 students. We had a 78% response rate, which really at any point in the year is excellent, but considering that it's over the summer, it's especially good. And then at Middlebrook, we had 551 students, which is 61% of the Middlebrook population eligible. And again, a very similar response rate, 79%. So we're going to advance to the next slide. At Wilton High School, Genesis, and Community Steps, we have confirmation that 961 students are fully vaccinated. So that's essentially 77% of the total population. We have confirmation that 1.8% are not vaccinated, and then 21.3% have not responded yet. So, just anecdotally, we've gotten responses from families saying, well, my child will be vaccinated by the end of the summer or at the start of September. And so we suspect that we're going to get more responses, and that many of those responses will be that the students are vaccinated. So, when we look at a 77% vaccination rate, it doesn't mean that, the remaining percentage reflects students who are not vaccinated. It just means that we don't necessarily know yet. And if we move on to Middlebrook, we have 898 students there. That's the total population, 551 eligible. We have about 45% essentially that are fully vaccinated, 3.6% confirmed unvaccinated, and 12.9% that haven't responded yet. And this chart reflects what those percentages look like compared to the entire Middlebrook population. I thought you might be interested in knowing, across the school, approximately what percentage of students we have that are confirmed vaccinated, knowing that the entire population is not eligible. And if we look at the next slide, the vaccine eligible students, the vaccination rate of those students who are eligible is essentially the same. It's very similar to the high schools. It's about 73% of eligible students are confirmed vaccinated. Just under 6% are confirmed unvaccinated, and we have 21% that have not responded yet. Now, I've left room at the end for questions. Is that okay? Or do you prefer to stop now and ask questions about the students before I move on to the employees?
We'll wait. Go ahead.
Okay, so we'll move on to the employees. Tonight's update reflects information about 616 district employees. That includes certified staff, our teachers, our counselors, our specialists, non-certified staff, our paraprofessionals, custodians, office staff. Like with the parent population, we have many staff members who are away over the summer. We hope that many don't check email, that they really take the time to recharge. And so what we're sharing tonight, again, just reflects who has responded to the survey. We continue to have people checking in and responding for the first time. So we're sharing with you what we have as of now. We did not include in this update information about our substitutes, cafeteria aides, and athletic coaches. While we administered the survey to members of those groups, we recognize that, for one, they're the least likely to check their email over the summer, so the response rate has not been as high as the other groups. And two, those are the groups that change the most in terms of, turnover. So we continue to hire for those groups, and we'll look forward to presenting the information on those groups at a later date. So if we take a look at the next slide with our confirmed vaccination rates by location, I think this is a very positive start for where we are. If you look at Miller Driscoll, 141 employees, 85% are confirmed vaccinated. And I want to be clear that as we look at the different sites, we only have at this point about 3 to 5% of our staff who have confirmed that they're not vaccinated. So when you look at a percentage like 85% vaccinated at Miller Driscoll, it doesn't mean the 15% aren't. It just means we haven't heard back from most of the remaining 15%. Just to break those groups down a little bit more, we have 88% of certified staff. Those are the teachers and support, the specialists that work with the students, the counselors. And then 80% of non-certified staff, paraprofessionals, secretaries, custodians would fall into that group. At Cider Mill, very similar, 124 employees, 82% vaccinated. To break down that group a bit more, 86% of certified staff are confirmed vaccinated, 73% of non-certified staff vaccinated. At Middlebrook, it's similar again, 84% of the entire staff population is confirmed to be vaccinated, 86% of certified staff, 81% of non-certified staff. And then if we take a look at the next slide, we have the high school Genesis and community steps groups, 84% vaccinated, 88% of the certified staff at those sites are vaccinated, 75% of non-certified staff are vaccinated. District offices, this includes central office, the business office, the continuing education leadership, 93% are confirmed to be vaccinated, 100% of the certified staff are vaccinated, and 91% of non-certified staff are vaccinated. And then if we look just overall across the district, no surprise, there's that 85%, again, keeps coming up, vaccinated, 87% of certified staff and 79% of non-certified. So I think this is a really great place to be, considering that, we weren't sure what response rate we would get over the summer. We continue to get responses, daily. We're reaching out to staff as well. And in terms of the other groups that were not included, the substitutes, coaches, and cafeteria aides, we do have some data on them, just not enough that I felt that it was an accurate reflection. So I'll look forward to sharing that at a later date. Now I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Maria, I have a question. It's Mandy. Can you go back one slide?
Sure. Which slide is that?
Yeah, this one. So all schools, so 616 employees, 512 vaccinated. So are we assuming you haven't heard from 104, or of those whole numbers, like what percentage are not vaccinated?
Well, we have confirmation from about 3 to 5% that are not vaccinated.
And how are we handling when a staff member says, I'm not vaccinated and I'm not getting vaccinated?
So that's interesting because, as we've seen in this world of COVID, things change so rapidly that we have, as of 4 p.m. today, a mandate from Governor Lamont that requires all staff that work in schools K through 12 to be vaccinated. And we haven't, obviously, it's just been a few hours since he made that announcement, so we haven't had sufficient time to process what that means. But, naturally, when there are mandates like the one that he made today, or the one that he announced today, there are medical exemptions that people would need to apply for and qualify for. There are religious exemptions. And there's also, from what I could see from my, just preliminary exploration of what he sent out, there's also a test out option if people who refuse to be vaccinated agree to weekly testing. However, who pays for that is in question, because the state is not covering that type of testing for individuals at this time. So for people who have very specific reasons for not being vaccinated, there does appear to be a provision for them. For others, I think we'd have to work through that. I mean, it's the governor's mandate, so we're required to follow that, to adhere to that, and to ensure that our employees do. I think it's also important to recognize that there may be issues with bargaining units. Our bargaining units may demand to bargain over the impact of this mandate and what that might look like. So again, this is all late breaking news, and we don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but there's a lot less choice for people when a mandate like this is issued. So I'm happy to update more as we proceed in the coming days and weeks, but this is what we know as of almost 4 hours ago today.
And then for like the future booster and for kids who turn 12, say in October, what's the best way to disseminate that information once they receive the boosters or they receive the vaccination? Do we have like one email address for the whole school, or?
You're talking like if parents want to volunteer
Yeah.
the information without being affirmatively asked for it?
Yes. So if I have a child in October turns 12 and I want to go get that information, could we possibly
Right.
set up some way to get that information to you instead of having you have to keep sending out surveys?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. I think what we'll do is just post something to the website. We'll probably continue to send out reminders, just because some people really like the reminders, or just like the ease of having something right in front of them, not having to go find a link, but we'll also post something to our website. We want to make this as easy for staff and for families as possible.
Yeah, I think that'd be great, especially for all the kids turning 12 in the fall. And my
Right.
last question is the substitute, well, I have two questions. Substitute aides, athletic coaches, what's the
Yes.
plan for them? Are they included in the governor's mandate?
They are.
They are,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, it's all employees.
So how many, right now we have 616. How
Yeah.
many will that add substitute aides, athletic coaches approximately? Are we talking 30, 50, 100?
Oh, no, we're close to 800.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we have many athletic coaches over the course of a year. We have, between 60 and 100 substitutes. We like to be on the higher end of that number when we're lucky, but right now we have about 60 substitutes. And then we have not very many cafeteria aides across the district, maybe 10 to 15. Yes, they're included. We've already administered the survey to them. However, as I mentioned earlier, they're less likely to check their email over the summer. Some of the coaches don't work until the winter or the spring. So that's just going to take us a little bit more time to work through. But we're absolutely committed to collecting that information and obviously to adhering to the governor's mandate.
So would you say we're committed to, on the first day of school, for those that this is important to, that everyone in the schools will be vaccinated?
You mean the staff?
Well, the governor's mandate is.
Staff.
No, we couldn't commit to the first day of school, having
Right.
everybody vaccinated. No, and the governor's mandate is, I think it's by the 27th of September.
Okay.
And so, it's going to take us.
Some time,
We
right.
don't even have the details yet.
Right,
and
I
so-
didn't think that was gonna happen, I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that. And my last question is parents who want to come into the school.
Yeah, so we're allowing volunteers and visitors in a limited fashion.
But will they have to show proof of vaccination to come in?
Just to enter the school, this mandate is really for employees, so I would think not. And, folks are in when they volunteer. It's for a very limited time. We have all of the other mitigation strategies we've just spoken about in
Yep.
place. So at this point, I don't see requiring that. I don't see the necessity of requiring that either.
Got it.
So if I were a parent sending a kid to school, looking at your numbers, Maria, it looks like very close to 90% of certified staff in each building is confirmed vaccinated. And some of those numbers may rise if you get more information or people finish up their vaccines. And then by September 27th, that number may be higher. Or, well, unless they have an exemption, that part of the governor's thing isn't quite
But
clear.
Jenny, that's 90% who have responded.
No,
like,
that's the total.
Of the total,
population.
okay, that's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's,
That's right.
yeah,
Our staff
I think that's remarkable.
pretty-
recommended and
Pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Maria, and your whole staff for collecting this information and presenting it so clearly. But I think that should be heartening to parents who are wondering about the vaccination status of staff, that it looks like close to 90% of certified staff in each site are fully vaccinated now, and that number can only rise.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's great.
Yeah, it's a great place to start.
Yeah, so thank you, everyone.
Great, other questions? Any other questions on vaccines?
Yeah, I guess the only other question is, do we have a vehicle for knowing who is not vaccinated because they have antibodies having recovered, from COVID, or having had COVID and have the antibodies? Do we know how to identify that? It may be a small number, I don't know. But
Well, I would just say, right, I'm just going to go with the most recent mandate that was issued by the governor. That doesn't exclude people who may have antibodies. And, people who have had COVID are also recommended to be vaccinated, even if they have antibodies. So I'm not aware at this time of any exception for people who have antibodies. We haven't collected that information. And, all of the recommendations that I have seen have been for people to be vaccinated, even if they've just recovered from having COVID, which I know may seem, counterintuitive to some, but we've seen lots and lots of people, even staff members who recovered and were advised by their physicians to be, to receive their second dose in many cases within, a very short period of time. So we don't have that information at this time.
okay.
And I had one question about bus drivers. Were those included in your survey, or are they separate?
So bus drivers are not employed by us, they're employed by STA. We did include the bus drivers. We worked with the town and received, support from the town health department to include them in our vaccination clinics in the spring. And a number of them did participate. But because they're not our employees, we did not administer the survey to them. However, we are in the process of collecting that information from STA in the same way that we're collecting that information from Chartwell's, our food service provider, because their employees are not ours and we don't necessarily have the same access to them.
will they be considered employees under the governor's order?
Yes, I forget exactly the way it was initially phrased, but my understanding was, essentially anyone who works with or is associated with kids in schools will be mandated, and I believe that does cover bus drivers.
Drivers and
Yeah.
cafeteria.
It's
Workers,
essentially
okay.
anyone who comes into the school,
Okay.
yeah. So those are the kinds of clarifications
Yes.
we'll get once we see the written executive order, but I think that's accurate. Great. So just several, go ahead.
Any other questions, comments on either presentation? All right, well, thank you both. That's a tremendous amount of work, and thank you for presenting it. And thank you for thinking of just about all the details.
So,
So,
Thank you.
thank you. And thanks, Kevin, for agreeing to work on kind of making it as user-friendly as possible.
of course,
Yeah,
of course.
Thank you.
I think there's a few other pieces here just to go over.
Of course.
One, as we've been talking about since the springtime, and we have made plans, our learning model, as you know, is in-person, full day, 5 days a week for all of our students. We don't plan to offer a voluntary remote option this year. And so, the expectation is that kids will be coming to school in person. If students need to quarantine for the reasons we were discussing a short while ago, the plan at the moment is to enable them to access their lessons through Schoology. So we had a whole year of using Schoology. We got some great feedback from some of our students at the end of the year last year. We continue to provide training to our staff and families on the use of Schoology. So, the expectation is that lesson content will be available to them. We do have plans to provide some tutorial support to students, and so we're still refining those details. That tutorial support may come from some of our certified instructional staff. It may come from some of our other homebound tutors or others, but students can expect to have some support while they're home. And then we're, also asking teachers to make sure that they're checking in on any of their students who are requiring quarantine.
Can I interrupt and just ask one question?
Yeah.
While I'm thinking about it along those lines. So are all kids going to be assigned a Chromebook again this year? Or is it going to be like in the younger schools as needed?
I believe we'll have all kids assigned to Chromebooks because, especially in the younger grades, if kids need to quarantine, they'll need to access them. What will be different, kids will certainly be relying on our Chromebooks, but, as we saw last year, that was the primary vehicle, and even when kids were in person, they spent a lot of time in front of their screens. So I don't expect that kids will be on their screens to the same degree that they were a year ago because we'll have teachers providing so much direct instruction in person. So kind of along those same lines.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
And this is just because we can talk about it later, but the remote option, I understand the not choice, not voluntary, we're not doing it widespread, knock on wood, all of those things. But I think we learned that having that technology tool can be valuable in some situations. So for those special circumstances where some students' needs may benefit from it on a short-term, temporary, with the goal of, full active live participation, I just would hate us to say we're not going to do any of it as a blanket statement. That's all. I hope that's not our message.
No, well, I think here's what I would say, and maybe we're not talking about the same thing, but as a district, we're absolutely what we've been describing as remote ready, and so we had an entire year's worth of experience, using our remote tools. We have the technology. What we heard loud and clearly from all of our instructional staff, for the most part, was the challenges around the hybrid classroom. And so, we really, because of all of that really rich feedback about the lack of effectiveness and the challenge of managing two environments, we're really, we weren't insisting on maintaining a hybrid environment.
Sure.
And so will we have opportunities, or may there be some circumstances that necessitate a hybrid environment? Quite possibly. And then, we respond, we work with staff, and, we do what we need to do to support kids. I think, in the other possible situations like we experienced a year ago, if for some reason an entire class needed to quarantine, then we run a full remote class. And so that we're certainly equipped to do. If we, come to a situation where we have a number of kids, across a grade level who need to quarantine, or there's some other circumstances that are keeping them out of school, and we need to create a remote class, I think we have the staff and the expertise to be able to pull that together in pretty short order as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Great. Some of this we may have already covered. So we talked about transportation with some of your questions a moment ago. We are inviting all of our families to utilize our buses. So we have a number of them. They roll right by your house, so feel free to put your children on them in the mornings. Just remember to have a mask on your children. There were lots of us who experienced the traffic issues last year, and so we're not, as we were in the past, recommending parents drive their kids to school. So please use your taxpayer-funded school buses.
Will we have aides on the buses again this year or not?
No, we didn't have aides on the buses last year. No.
Did I read correctly, though, that seats will be assigned?
we're going to have assigned seats, and that's really because of the need to contact trace.
Yeah, no, I totally understand.
Yeah.
I just want it to be clear that I read it right and that parents will understand that.
Right.
So Kevin, if your child wants to take the bus, do you have to tell them, like, prior? I mean,
No, you don't need to make a reservation,
what I mean.
so you can take the bus.
but
Yeah.
the assigned seats kind of part.
Yeah, so the bus drivers will have pre-populated rosters, and so
Got it.
students who are on those rosters will have an assigned seat on the bus. It'll probably take a few days, maybe a week to sort
Got
that
it.
all out.
Okay.
We talked about lunch recess. Just again, in terms of trying to promote more typical life of school, we have childcare available. Dolores informed me the other day that we're at capacity right now, and like so many other sectors, she noted that she was having difficulty finding childcare workers, and so we're at capacity at the moment and don't have capacity to expand. So. Hopefully that'll change in short order, but childcare is available. We'll be running our full complement of after-school activities. We'll be running our full complement of athletics, as people hopefully read. All of that's done in accordance with the guidance we have from CIAC, CDC, SDE, DPH. To Mandy's question a moment ago, we'll be welcoming visitors back into the building and volunteers back into the building, and our intention there again is to start slowly. Most of our parents, if they read some of the information that was published, already know that we have scheduled for next week Meet the Teacher Days, and so the principals put out information about that. So those are scheduled, and we're looking forward to seeing people in person and allowing our students to meet the teacher in person.
That's wonderful.
Kevin, do you know how short we are for after school?
I don't. You know somebody?
Jen, are you free?
Yes.
It's a great job.
Are you vaccinated? There you go.
Great.
You're in.
Yeah. So I just want to take a couple minutes and talk about our instructional and social emotional learning priorities. And again, this is not new information, but I think for the sake of the importance of repetition, it's important to speak out loud. So we've spelled out several goals. Those were published in some of our recent communications, and as well in our return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan that we developed and put to the website and shared with all of you at our last meeting. So, briefly, our goals. We are ensuring the health and safety of all of our staff and students. We have a goal to support the social and emotional learning needs of our students, to address the unfinished learning that's been wrought by the pandemic through an instructional and intervention model. And then lastly, we're looking to restart the implementation of our long-range strategic objectives, which primarily include the work around Portrait of a Graduate. So that's some very exciting work that we're looking to reinitiate this coming school year. So with respect to instruction, and we'll set up another board workshop sometime in the next several weeks so we can really get into the weeds on the instructional framework that we're using to address unfinished learning through the pandemic here. The framework that we're referring to is often called an accelerated learning framework, and so I'll just pardon the educational jargonese here. I'll break it down for you pretty simply, and then just know that we'll spend time with Chuck and his team and really go through it in great detail. The framework focuses on delivering grade-level content that prioritizes essential skills and content, using routine assessments and other learning data. Teachers and administrators work in teams to more closely monitor and respond to student progress. So not anything new, but I think a more rigorous approach. So the components of the accelerating learning framework are these. 1, responsive teaching based on formative real-time assessment. So in a nutshell, what does that mean? That teachers are using the information available to them, whether it's formative assessment, summative assessment, other anecdotal measures, and really deeply understanding where kids are and what's next for them in terms of the learning progression, and then responding. Okay, so we've talked about elements of this when we've talked about differentiated instruction, but we're looking to really key in on this much more broadly across the district. The second element of an accelerating learning framework speaks to the prioritization of essential concepts and skills. And so you'll recall a year ago, more than a year ago, we began to talk about priority standards. And so what that means is, as a staff on a grade level, as a group of teachers, really getting clarity about what are the most essential standards, concepts, and understandings that kids need to have, and focusing on those on a particular grade level. Okay, the next piece, the third piece here in the framework is referred to as designing academic tasks as deep learning experiences. And so what that calls us to do is really give deeper consideration to what we're asking kids to do in service of the learning. Okay, so is the learning task, do we know that it's grade level? Do we know that it's rigorous? Do we know that it's aligned to a standard? And so, taking some pause and really looking at those tasks and ensuring that those pieces are in place. The fourth piece really speaks to promoting student self-efficacy, and so that work is largely embedded in a lot of the social and emotional learning work that we do, and really teaching students to be curious and strong self-advocates, and really taking ownership for engaging in their learning. And then the final piece here references scaffolding learning and prerequisite skills, and again, to summarize simply what that means is not only knowing what kids need to do next, but also knowing what kind of steps they might need to take, or what kind of gaps there are in their learning, and filling those in so they can take that next step in the learning. So none of that's new for us. Really what's new is focusing on more deeply understanding each of those pieces, and then also better understanding how those components fit together in this framework. So Chuck and his team are going to be working through the principals and with our instructional staff implementing this framework. We've contracted with the Connecticut Center for School Change to provide professional learning support. So we began some of that work this summer at our administrators retreat, and that will continue throughout the year.
A question?
Yeah, go for it.
Have there been any standardized assessments developed targeted specifically at COVID loss, learning loss as a result of COVID?
None that I am aware of. I mean, the standardized measures that are available to us have not changed. So we use the Smarter Balanced assessments here, the SAT. Locally, we've adopted the NWA MAP test.
Okay.
And so those are, primarily the standardized measures that we use.
Yeah, for some reason, I would have thought that perhaps somewhere along the way, someone would have worked to develop some mechanism for measuring learning loss as a result of COVID. Maybe not, I don't know.
Actually, the MAP test does measure the amount of learning loss. And we'll talk about that at the workshop.
Okay, all right, okay. All right, thanks, Chuck. Thank you.
Chuck, I have a question about that as well. So do we have an idea, speaking of COVID learning loss, I know from experience, for example, Middlebrook, some classes finished going through XYZ section, some classes in the same grade finished going through, I don't know, whatever alphabet you want to throw before that. So do we have a way of determining, like, okay, Jen is a child, she hasn't even learned about blank, and now she's going to the next year, and she's with Glenn, who has already covered that. Like, and where on average, how many weeks behind were we on average? Do you have like a specific number, like we finished last year 4 weeks behind in 6th grade? I just didn't know if you had that data.
Yeah, and it's not consistent data. As you just said, it varies by teacher and teacher. And I wasn't prepared tonight to talk about that, but we will definitely talk about it at the workshop.
Okay, perfect.
That's one complicated thing.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not.
It is. There's a lot there, and so it bears its own meeting where we can just walk through, pretty slowly.
In general, I just want to make the comment that I like the fact that we're doing more assessment and looking to make real-time changes for that as the assessments come in. And just as a board, if there are resources that are needed to jumpstart that work or to get over, in the short term, some, unfinished learning, that I would, like it to be brought to us, so we can definitely
Sure.
address them, on the sooner side.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. So the additional benefit of first, as you recall, the Sr2 grant. So that was $325,000 or so. Don't quote me, it's been a while since I looked at that number. But we used those funds to hire a full-time math interventionist and then a part-time social worker. Full-time math interventionist at Cider Mill, part-time social worker at the high school. So we have some resources in place to, kind of hit the ground running there. And then beyond that, the ARP Sr3 grant, we had $834,000 allocated to us to be used this year and next to support unfinished learning and social emotional needs for students. And so we've written a plan that we shared with you. We received some comment over the summer. We've just sent the first draft of that plan to the state to be reviewed. But that plan, too, seeks to provide funds to do a number of things. So we use some of those funds to run some of our summer learning programs this past summer. We set aside a chunk of funds to hire additional elementary school teachers to keep class sizes on the low end of our average, which I'll give you those details in just a second. So we hired 3 additional classroom teachers, 2 in kindergarten, 1 in first grade, to keep our class sizes smaller. We continue to watch our numbers even as we come into the start of school here. And then we also used a chunk of those funds, or are using a chunk of those funds, to hire part-time interventionists. And those interventionists will work K-8, and they'll directly support kids and teachers who we identify as needing that kind of extra support. So we're looking really to provide some really intensive support during the first half of this school year. So, as Chuck was describing, we can understand where kids are and then, move them along as quickly as possible. The second piece of those funds we're using to support the just social emotional learning needs. And so that's being expressed through engagement with a Norwalk organization, Children and Families Aid. So they're going to be able to provide some additional staff for us, again, as another layer of mental health support. And they also open up the resources. So if we have to refer students or families out for outside mental health support, through this engagement, our kids and families get to go to the front of the line. And as you know, if you've read, referral services are really
They're in dire
difficult to find.
straits right now.
Across the state. So we think across the country. Right. So. We think the plan is solid. We're really, keenly focusing on academics and academic intervention, and we have the staff and the programs in place to get a sense of where kids are and respond meaningfully as we start the school year. Questions, comments about that piece?
Quick question, you mentioned the interventionist would help the students and the faculty?
Yeah. Well, students primarily.
Okay, because I was just wondering about that.
Yeah. All right, so the last piece I have for you, just as an overall update, and we get to meet again, so I'll have another round of information for you. It's just, and I'll just share this with you briefly. I've provided this to you already, but we are, as of just a few days ago, about 169 students above the November projection. And so, I'm not terribly surprised by that. We knew that there were kids out there. And just, the greatest differences are in the primary grades. So, kindergarten, we're about 40 students beyond the projection, and first grade, we're about 26 students, 17 in second grade, and, the numbers begin to taper from there. But in every grade, we're showing, some kind of increase over the projection.
And so can you, you sent us one chart. Could you maybe send it again or
Sure.
update it for next week? Just sort of right
Yeah,
before
and-
school numbers?
Is there a deadline
Because
for
we're
enrollment or
registering.
not? What's the cutoff?
So for reporting purposes to the state, October 1 is the cutoff.
Okay.
And so those are
From a parent's perspective, if they haven't registered yet,
they ought,
They
they're
can
in town, and they ought to register as soon as possible.
Okay.
But no, it's always rolling because people move and change and.
okay, all right. So it still could go up. I mean, we
Yeah,
still-
we might get less.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and so these numbers, we also, people have moved out of town and, haven't yet
Withdrawn.
notified us of their withdrawal. So, these numbers will adjust, but,
Okay.
I'm feeling pretty confident in general about where they are.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's remarkable to see the increase.
Yeah.
It's not surprising at all. I think it's a positive sign for us
Right.
and for our school system.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
To see that kind of increase, that there's faith, there's confidence in what we're doing, and I think it's really a positive sign.
Yep, I think so.
Yeah, we watched the real estate market go crazy,
Yeah.
and I was thinking, where are those kids? Well, now they're here.
They're
That's
here.
great.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's great. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, good. All right, so just keep us updated that, and you've had, well, we'll probably hear about hiring next week too, but
Yes.
you've been keeping up with hiring with.
We have been.
Okay.
Yep, we have been, and we're, except for the very late resignations, we've had a good hiring season.
Yeah.
Maria will take us through
Saw
that
that.
next Thursday.
Okay, then we'll have to be more up to date then. Great.
Okay, on to goals.
That's it? You're done with all your stuff?
Well,
That was
I'm
amazing.
looking at this meeting, we've got next meeting.
Okay,
we've got
okay.
another one in
We
September.
got enough meetings. Okay.
Due in September. Due in October.
All right, the next item is Board of Education goals. I drafted these for everybody's information, and Lucille, I don't know if, do you have those? Yeah. We are just we're gonna take tonight to discuss them a little bit. I know you haven't had time to digest them. And certainly next week, be another discussion. So there's no rush to approve these, but I did want to get them to you to start us thinking, to make sure that everything that we know about, that we've included. So these goals are based on a lot of our budget discussions when we sort of built that way back when, in terms of why we're going to put our resources where we're putting them. So they're based on our budget discussions. They're based on our meetings and some of our subcommittee work. They're based obviously on COVID recovery. And then very last thing we did last year, we just had a little Board of Ed self-evaluation workshop. So I tried to capture all those kind of thinking along the way. So just to be, let's just go over the sort of the categories. And if you think I missed something or whatever, you can ask questions now or send me suggestions and we can update the draft for next week. But the first one was really about health and safety and having to continue to monitor and keep abreast of the COVID conditions. Goal number 2 was to return. We talked a lot about this last year. We want this year to be as normal as possible. So broadly speaking, be on site, in person, full-time, full range of activities, et cetera. The third goal has to do with, and this Kevin kept correcting me, it's not learning loss, it's unfinished learning is the term of art for this year. So anytime I was going to write learning loss, I said, nope, got to correct it. So it's really unfinished learning, and Kevin just talked about some of the accelerated framework, and
We'll hear more from Chuck about that.
we'll hear more about from Chuck, and, sort of where kids left off, just because there wasn't enough time last year as part of the issue. And Ruth, to your point about resources, I think that's as a sub-goal there. The next goal, broadly speaking, is about social emotional learning, certainly in response to COVID, but also there were many comments last year about how proud we are of our social emotional attention to social emotional learning, and that we were proud of that as a district, and we wanted to make sure that we continue that. The next one was on academic achievement. We talked last year about sort of the need for clear data that we could easily follow, that we could understand improvement plans, et cetera, and that we wanted to focus a particular attention on math. And so I think that was what we agreed to last year, and we had talked with Dr. Smith about that. So anyway, so there's some specifics about that, so please feel free to add, wordsmith, whatever. We also talked about consistency there. I think that was sort of a little bit of a concern last year, just curricular and instructional consistency within a grade level. So we talked about assured experiences. I think that was the term. Category 6 is about the portrait of the graduate. I always sort of refer to it as our strategic plan, and if you remember last year, we adopted it, even though the language we felt was a little bit long and perhaps less than immediately accessible, in terms of an elevator speech. But we do have those aspirations there, and I know the district is going to, well, Kevin and Chuck will probably sort of roll out what the next steps are. But we need to keep that front and center. The next one is around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We had started, according to Kevin, some initial discussions amongst faculty about some of the issues and goals. And time ran out last year to really kind of dive into it, so I wanted to make sure that was certainly not forgotten. So that's the topic of our workshop next Tuesday afternoon. So again, look at that language, see what you think. Number 8, of course, is developing a budget. We do that every single year, and I just wanted to make sure that we put all our steps there and that we're happy with them. I did want to, I think Glenn and I have talked about, the budgeting for the large capital improvement items, and most recently, even some of the technology items have come under question. So how to budget for those is something we've got to finally come to terms with. And I think that will involve conversations with the town. Otherwise, it's our fairly normal budget process. Number 9 is to work on our own governance. And I think every time we get together, we say we have to improve, expand, continue avenues of communication. So again, I tried to include that there. And also some of the committee work. Some committees have very complicated things to do. So how can we better engage ourselves with that? And I guess I'm looking in particular at the Teaching and Learning Committee, I think. And then we want to make sure that we have adequate time in our meetings and or workshops to sort of address things in a comprehensive, thoughtful manner. So Kevin and I always work on agendas, but if you feel that there are items, I think Jen, you might have talked about ordering them slightly differently. We just need to kind of fine tune that. That's what I meant by that, et cetera, that allusion. And the last thing, of course, is, we're the ambassadors for the district to try to highlight our good work, of which it's amazing, the comprehensiveness and just the different realms that a school district operates, and want to try to highlight all of the good work that our amazing staff is doing and our outstanding kids. So that's kind of an overview of the buckets of the goals. And then there are there's little sub-sentences under each one. So please take a look, wordsmith it, send it back to me. We'll try to get a new draft out next week. If you have any comments now, that's fine. Otherwise, we can talk about it next week as well.
It's pretty comprehensive.
It's so comprehensive.
Yeah, it's pretty, yeah. I don't think you missed a base.
All right, thank
Okay?
you, Glenn.
I don't think. I tried to think of one, I couldn't.
Deb, I can send this to you, but my only thing for number 5,
Yeah.
we talked about this, instead of improving academic achievement, I think we should say advancing for everybody. So not just for the children who are in the lower and need improvement. I think it's important to remember that we should advance it for everybody,
Everyone.
regardless of where
For all students.
for
Okay.
all students.
Good point. All right, so as you have thoughts like that, please just email me and I will try to update the draft for next week. And again, there's no rush here to approve them. We also need to give Dr. Smith a chance to bring his goals forward. I think they're pretty much in sync with what he's been talking about, but if not, he'll have a chance to tell us as well.
And Deb, on a side note.
Of course.
Ruth and I were just talking. I know I'm not one of the people who hasn't checked my email all summer, but I think I missed the workshop Tuesday afternoon. What are the times of that?
Is it a 1 hour, 2 hour? It says 1 o'clock.
I
think
We scheduled two, I think we
it's
scheduled
usually
two.
2, 1 to 3.
It's 1 to 3.
I have to go back and find that schedule that was sent out.
It was on the wall.
I remember seeing it.
It
and I
was like,
never-
Lucille sent an email, it was one of the attachments.
Yeah.
That was the
Yeah,
first.
I have it Tuesday.
Attachments
1
always
to 3.
get me.
Yeah. Does the schedule was on one of your emails, Lucille, as an attachment?
Yeah, it was a doodle kind of poll, and then we decided on the 24th, and I believe it was 1 to 3.
Three.
1
Yeah.
to 4 even, I don't know, or.
It's 1 to 3.
1 to 3?
Yeah.
24.
And if we are shorter than that, that's
On the
fine.
24th.
But,
On the 24th, and
yeah.
I didn't know if it was going to be, it was going to be in person, so I didn't
Yep.
send a Zoom invite, but I'll send out the agenda. I think it's active, right?
Yeah, and I understand people's busy schedules, so if it's easier to call in or Zoom in, that's fine too. So as many of us will meet in person, otherwise the rest of us can Zoom, and it's public as well.
I'll get it over the ground.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so that leads us to a policy discussion about student dress and grooming.
Right, so.
I didn't see too much about grooming in it, to be honest. I'm just,
Primarily
but that's
student
okay.
dress, right? The policy is student dress and grooming, 5132. The policy committee met a couple times right at the end of the school year to review this policy. We looked at some draft policies from other districts and some model language, and we, I think the committee was mostly satisfied with the spirit of the existing policy, so we made some minor adjustments. We cleaned up some language, and we added a couple of pieces. So it's highlighted in green for you. So I'll just read it for you. So what the policy is stipulating here is that the responsibility for dress and grooming of a student rests primarily with the student and the student's parent or guardian. The district encourages students and parents to work together to ensure that the students dress in a manner that's appropriate for the school day or any school-sponsored activity, and respects the district's intent and responsibility to ensure the health and safety and social and emotional well-being of all students. Some of the existing language: ordinarily a student's dress or grooming shall not affect his or her participation in school classes, programs, or school-related activities. If, however, the dress or grooming of a student disrupts the educational climate or process, we struck some old language, or poses a threat to the health or safety of a student or any other person, the principal or principal's designee may require the student to change the student's clothing, the student's dress or grooming. So that's the policy.
Yeah, so-
And do you want to?
I mean, I think we looked at this really hard, and I think we struck the right balance, between respecting the educational environment and recognizing, the need for self-expression and comfort, and just really making sure that the code is applied consistently and equitably across the district and schools and classrooms.
Yep.
And you'll see that more in the regulation that accompanies it, and making sure that any violations are handled, professionally and confidentiality, and with a mind towards and regard for age appropriateness. And I think that those were what we set to achieve, and I think the policy sets that tone, and then the regulation amplifies it.
Right.
Quick question. Is there a dress code at each building level?
So thank you for asking that question. We had the district policy that was in place, and then there was not a set standard regulation. And so this regulation is new, and that resulted really from this recognition that some of our lower schools had specific regulations that they had crafted sometime in the past in their handbooks. And some of the language...
Is there a dress code for that school for that building?
Right. It's it was the regulatory language,
Right.
and so some of the language honestly wasn't appropriate.
Okay.
And so we had an opportunity in the spring. There were a couple of issues that were raised. One was at Cider Mill, another was at Middlebrook, and so it really just opened the door for us to really look at this. And again, I think more importantly, to standardize the regulatory language for all of our schools. So upon approval, this will be the policy, this will be the regulation, this will be the regulation that lives in handbooks. And then, the next step for us will just be to, work with, ongoing training and conversations with all of our staff.
But what, the dress code itself, though, is my question.
This becomes, there is no specific dress code any longer.
Any longer? So we've,
Right.
okay, so there's no specific
Right.
detail, et cetera. This is it, period.
This is it.
The regulation.
Yeah.
Jeff, what about the subjective nature of this?
Yeah.
Well,
That's what we're all
it is
questioning.
subjective, and
Yeah.
so, what,
But like, where does the buck stop? So
Well-
like, a principal says, or teacher says, I think that this is creating distraction, like,
Yeah.
I just feel like this opens up to, and I appreciate all the work the policy committee did on this, but I feel like this opens up to a huge can of worms of subjective.
Yeah, I think honestly, Mandy, I would take the other position and say it actually narrows some of the opportunities. And here's what I'll say, just kind of experientially. With respect to the policy, except for the changes that we're proposing, that policy's been in place for many years.
Right,
And-
but each school has had its own.
Yeah, well, the schools have had their own
Dress codes.
dress code
Right.
regulation.
Right.
But the issues that we've experienced in general, at least as they've come to my attention, have been few and far between. And so I think if you go back to the spirit of what we're asking, we're reaffirming, kind of our pre-established belief that student dress is really the obligation of the student and the student's parents. And then if there is a question or a concern, ultimately it falls to the principal or, per the policy, the principal's designee, right, to kind of sort that out. And, what we're asking, I think what we, had learned, at least in one experience, is that, it may not have been handled in the most delicate way.
Right.
And so I think that's what, when we're working with staff and working with our administrators, that's what we need to confront.
Got it. So you're seeing the other side of this as far as subjectivity, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, boy, I'm just uncomfortable with this approach.
I think the staff is really key, and I, as someone who's a dinosaur, right? So I won't say which of my children, but one of my children had a problem, like it would probably fall, with hygiene, and it was handled beautifully. I have to say, the teacher talked to the nurse talked to me. My child never knew that it was someone from the, and that was, I thought, and that came to mind over what was going on in the spring. And obviously at the high school at least, like everyone knows when someone has to change their clothes because it's a fishbowl. But I think there are ways to handle it more sensitively, and it always falls on girls, and we all have opinions of how our daughters should dress or how our sons respond to. But I also feel that girls get a lot of attention. Trust me, they hear a lot from the boys at the high school if they're dressed, whatever. But I think the sensitivity, and teachers should be talking to the students directly, and if they're trained and there's a way to
Right.
talk about it and involve the parents. And I know teenagers are tough, but especially at like Sacramento and Middlebrook, there's no reason, they have all those systems in place to handle it sensitively. And I think, we sometimes lose things over time, and whatever used to be standard becomes, it's just teachers are like, oh, I think it's easier just to address the child directly or whatever. But,
Right.
my experience personally as a parent was lovely.
Yeah, and I think, just again, thinking about the numbers of issues we've had, it's been, I think I'm in year 8 now, and I would say, minimal. And so I think, what we're driving at here and the opportunity in front of us, again, as Laura was just describing, is to work, with staff again and just make sure that, it's understood and expected that, we have young people and these are delicate matters.
But how much of the fact that it's been minimal do you attribute to the fact that we had a very specific code in place to be followed?
We didn't have a very specific code in place per se, and the code wasn't consistent. So, for example, one of the questions that came up in some of the old Middlebrook language, was this prohibition about I've been talking about spaghetti straps, right? Which is inappropriate. That shouldn't be in a regulation. It's sexist, and it doesn't make sense. And so, I think to Laura's point, that's one of those targeted prohibitions. And so that's the kind of language that we're looking to get away from.
All right.
Kevin, I think, and to Glenn's point, I think that because what's acceptable to a parent and a child is not necessarily acceptable to school personnel. Is there a way, rather than addressing it during the school day, for teachers and staff and whomever to speak, to let it just go through for that day and address it after the fact? Instead of
Yeah.
us not targeting, but instead of us bringing up to the child and making that child uncomfortable and
Sure.
everybody else now
I
is
think that
staring
that
and.
Yeah.
in the regulations
the
where
whole-
it says, you know, to be professional, confidential, and age appropriate, so that that teachers should be supported and helped
Right.
and have a system and a protocol in place that addresses that. Because yes, it shouldn't be if one particular teacher is sensitive to something and another teacher is not, and it's one's being class dependent or class specific.
Yeah.
Or any, and that's about being
Well,
consistent and equitable across.
One suggestion to capture that, if you want closer communication with the family first rather than the student, is to write that in somehow into this
Yes.
regulation, that it's not necessarily the teacher to student, it can be perhaps preferably teacher to family.
Yeah, here's the
Or is that bad?
Well, I don't think it's bad, but this policy and this regulation, like all of our others, isn't going to speak to every possible scenario
Of
that
course
can
not,
unfold.
of course not.
And so,
No, as soon as you write either spaghetti strap or
Yeah,
talk to the
so
parent,
I would wanna
it's
be-
gonna, yeah, I
but
get that.
there may be a situation that crops up where a teacher does need to speak to a child directly.
Oh, yeah, and I don't mean to say it can't, but
Right.
But I also feel like
encourage.
at Middlebrook, like, I know my kids will come and say like, oh, so-and-so had to sit in the office for 3 hours waiting for a parent to bring new clothes, because everyone can see, you know, Middlebrook talk about a fishbowl, right? Everyone, like, why were you in the office? Why weren't you in science class? And I think that's what Jen was saying is, unless it's dangerous,
Yeah.
how many times do we have to address them, right?
Yeah.
Well, as high school principal, I remember some famous T-shirts worn by males,
Yeah.
you know, with obscene language or, you know,
And I think that
drug
that's-
messages. And so those,
Right.
that's a different thing than,
And that's different
Perhaps.
because you
Right,
have
that's disruptive in
explicitly
other ways.
written that down.
yeah.
Right? I mean, that's not subjective. That's, you've got this, you're leaving, you're changing, you're whatever.
Yeah,
It's the other
true.
part that's not explicit.
Yeah.
Kevin, the second page, is that the old one?
That's the regulation.
No, the regulation. So you have
Oh,
one
got it,
policy,
maybe.
one reg.
Got
yeah.
it, got it,
And
yes.
the regulation is all, that's new language.
Got it.
And typically, a board will approve the policy. We
Right.
don't approve the regulation, but we can give lots of advice on the regulation.
Got it.
Yeah, so I think, you know, I think I understand what you're going for, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I think the question is, how do we craft that language? So why don't we go back, why don't we now, we're our policy committee here, we'll go back and
Sorry.
we can play with that, we'll get some input from the
No, I mean, it was,
principals
and which
too.
was definitely why we tried to talk to address students or parents and professionally
Yeah.
and age appropriate. We were definitely talking about these same type of scenarios.
Yeah.
Leaving it broad enough for individual circumstances
Right.
to be worked out and narrow enough to know that there's a way that it shouldn't and can't
Sure.
be.
Right.
Yeah,
be
yeah,
done.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want to get, I wouldn't recommend being terribly
Yeah.
descriptive, because that breaks down, it's out of date as soon as you write it, in some ways,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
Because this year's worry will not be next year's worry necessarily when it comes to dress.
Right, so is that
It's getting
acceptable
there.
if we just kind of, we'll go back and
Yep.
revisit it and
Yeah. That's why we have
think about how we craft
discussion
it?
first and
Yeah.
then we
So this
approve
will
and
go
adjourn.
back on an agenda after our first policy.
Right.
Not for a few weeks.
Yeah, it'll come back. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Just take a note.
Okay, discuss and approve bell schedule.
Right, so I'm
Kevin, I
asking.
think you took us through that with some of your
Yeah, so the.
notes to
schedule.
us, but there's another chart in here that we got to.
Yeah, you used to have a board briefing.
Yep,
And so,
Makes sense.
you know, I think this is a minor adjustment, although important. What I'm asking is for the board to approve a motion to change the bell schedule, and it's a 5-minute change. And so the history here we've laid out for you in the board briefing, but in short, in our teacher's contract, and I think it's been in place for some time, the working day speaks to an average of 8 hours. And so ours is one of the unique contracts that actually has that. It also specifies the instructional day as 6 hours and 35 minutes, which is very common across school districts. In practice, for many, many years, our instructional day has been 6 hours and 30 minutes, not 35, even though that's provided for in the teacher's contract. And my understanding of the history is at some point in the past when the district switched to late start times for the middle school and the high school, there was an issue with students being, at Cider Mill students in particular, because they are the earliest run, on the at the bus stop by like 7 o'clock. And so some of the kids were out there, when the sun was still coming up. And so one of the accommodations, I understand, was to adjust the day to allow for that. And the loss was this loss of 5 minutes of instructional time. And so what I'm asking is that we adjust the bell schedules and re-adopt the 5 minutes. I think it's a minor change for all of the schools. So at Miller Driscoll, rather than start at 9:05, the instructional day would start at 9. At Cider Mill, rather than end the day at 2:10, it'll end at 2:15. High school, Middlebrook, rather than end at 2:50, it'll end at 2:55.
Do it.
So,
Yay.
I don't mind the change. My only question is, we talked about 5 minutes a day equals about 15 hours.
roughly.
But how are we using those 5 minutes productively to really get back?
Well, it's divided across the day, and so, it's not necessarily, Debbie asked a similar question, it's not like 5 more minutes in math, because the
Right.
day just doesn't
I
line
know,
up
I
that
was
way.
so mad when I figured out, you can't do that.
Yeah.
I was so mad.
Right.
Debbie's like, oh, what do you got?
Here,
And
we
there's
got
just-
extra math? Oh,
At
no,
this
we
point,
don't.
I don't see a way of doing that with the bell schedule. So,
So we
it's,
just-
the student experience will be, not 5 minutes of additional time in any one area.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Kevin, not to be nitpicky, but that last bullet point, it just says will meaningfully impact our students and will strengthen our ability to address our goals. I question the
Yeah.
meaningful impact, but I see what you're saying.
Long
But it's
term.
not it's not
Yeah.
15 hours that we're going to solve all the problems. It's-
We're definitely not solving all the
Right.
problems in an additional 15 hours, but 15 hours over the course of 12 years, right? Or 13.
that word meaningfully is sticky.
It might mean that a teacher has an extra 30 seconds to answer a question at the
Could
end
be.
of the class period.
Right.
You say will positively impact.
Well, this is for you, so.
Yeah, wordsmith.
Right.
It's a wordsmith, wordsmith.
We can sit here for an hour and
Yeah.
wordsmith it.
No,
Is it-
No, I think we say, you promised. You promised.
Yeah. Kevin, what exactly would we do with that 5 minutes a day?
Yeah.
All right, I move that we adopt the revised bell
Bell
schedule.
schedule.
I second.
I'm just going to add as outlined in the August 17th briefing.
Yep, fine, okay.
And so that was moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Nope. All right. There
Thank
go.
you.
Approved.
All right, done.
Okay, so now-
Done.
All right, we see enrollment, we see our future dates, which we're back here next Thursday.
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Yes, of course, Tuesday.
There, I saw it somewhere.
All right, so comments from the public. I don't see anybody physically present. Did we get any via email?
We did.
All right, before we do that then, I just want to say what I always say, is that public comment is limited to 2 minutes, and we do not respond directly, although we listen carefully. And please include your name and address.
Okay, I don't have the address. The name is.
Do we have a name?
Lisa Pagano.
Okay?
Dear Board of Education, I appreciate the district's draft goal priorities to be fiscally responsible to the taxpayer and support the social and emotional needs of students. Wilton instituted for budgetary reasons a pay-to-play policy creating a financial barrier to extracurricular involvement and experimentation, i.e. trying different clubs, etc. Extracurricular activities have been shown to be extremely beneficial to whole student, especially their social emotional well-being. See, and she includes a link to the case for high school activities. The introduction of federal ARP ESSER elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds to the district in response to COVID brings the opportunity to do more than refer children to external institutes for psychiatric evaluation, but correct and reverse, at least temporarily, the inequity of the pay-to-play policy and re-encourage students to increase interpersonal interactions and improve social emotional well-being, a stated primary objective of ESSER. Questions. Further to social emotional well-being of all students.
Lucille, no one can hear you. We just got a chat and I just got a text that people at home can't hear you. If you want to come closer to the microphone.
Questions. Further to social emotional well-being of all students, can the board explain how the dress code would ensure social emotional well-being of all students? And would there be a process to appeal the requirement to change clothes, as the decision criteria seems very subjective? Thank you, Lisa Pagano.
Okay, thank you. Just, can you summarize, for the people who couldn't hear at home, just the first half? Just, I don't want to,
The
Cause it to get
email
lost.
starts off about the goals of being fiscally responsible to the taxpayer and supporting the social and emotional needs of the students and pay-to-play policy. And they would like the ESSER funds to do more than refer children to external institutes and reverse the pay-to-play policy.
okay. I
And then
think
it ends with that question about student dress.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, thank you. And next time we'll remember to use the mic.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not your fault, it's new to us. All right, and so if you could pass that out to all the board members.
I'll forward it.
So we'll definitely, if we didn't hear everything, we can read it.
There
All
is a
right.
provision on pay-to-play if there's a financial difficulty.
Yes.
No, there is. I'm saying there is.
But we don't respond.
Huh?
Not discussing.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so any more comments from the public, Lucille? All right. All right, having finished our agenda, seeing no more business before the board, I'm looking at everybody. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
See you next week.
See you
See you Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Tuesday. And then Thursday, right?
Yes.
Tuesday, then Thursday.